Hey, everybody. Demetrius here with Nate. Tam, how's it going, Nate?
Going good, man. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. You might even say I'm in the zone. You might even say that, Nate.
Mm.
I just came up with that because that's what. Here's why that's funny is that's what our subject is going to be about is the zone. And so I took that and okay. All right. Well, we gotta, I start slow. I'm always just a little slow out of the gate. How have you been, man? I haven't talked to you for a while.
I've been good. I feel like I'm playing pool pretty all right now.
Yeah,
Not
you
bad.
are.
I did lose my practice table or access to the practice table. So that table was in my office building, but they're having us work from home now. So, and I don't have a table at home. Some of us are not as lucky as you. And man, it sucks not being able to practice when I really feel like I need to. And so but my training has changed a lot, but I do feel like I'm playing well, even though I don't have a table at home.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the things I'm looking forward to, so just uh, kind of what we're going to talk about today is you're going to share a little bit about your first experience in a big tournament with some top players, but then then we'll move into our main topic, which is the zone. But hey, I thought I'd warm up with this. This is pretty funny. I had a student, so I suppose I should also plug my boot camp. So I do 3-day boot camps, mnpoolbootcamp.com. MN stands for Minnesota, mnpoolbootcamp.com. Send me an email. I'll tell you what, the one thing that was my note for my boot camp plug for the week, I always have one thing is a lot of people, there's so much information, information on your YouTube channel. There's so much information out there on podcasts and videos, and you can watch the pros play. So why, with this sea of information that's free, should anyone pay to get side by side instruction? And the only thing I can say is I've seen it. I did 2 boot camps last week, back to back, Iron Man, 6 days of training. I mean, a beast. And I'll tell you what, without fail, here's why. Here's why you should come train, because knowledge is theory, and then there's practice is doing it. And these people, Nate, the way that you have to hit the balls, the techniques and the speeds and the timing and the tip accuracy and where you're hitting on the cue ball and how to get the shot to react the way you want it to. I can tell them how. They have the knowledge. They understand it. They can understand it when I do it, but they can't do it until we work together. And there are spots on the cue ball where they've said to me, I would never in my life have hit the ball that way had you not done some things to make me, like maybe I'll put a blocker ball in front of the cue ball to force them to hit the right spot, or I'll put the cue, a break cue across the table and force them to cue underneath it to hit the right low, or different things, or just sitting the shot side by side. And so then they'll finally hit it. And it goes from like they don't know the shot to they understand it, but they can't do it. So then they can kind of once in a while do it, but it's like a total trick shot and they can't reproduce it. And then over the course of side by side training, they'll start to get it a little bit more often, and then it'll go away, and then it'll come back and it'll go away. And we have 3 days together. And by on day one, they'll have certain shots working pretty well. And then day two, it won't be working as well. And then we'll massage it again and come back to it and hit it a different way. And then by the end of day three, they're still not loving it, but all of a sudden they feel good about the shot. They know the shots. They know the feel of the shots. And I will tell you, it is a 3 day, all day hard work to develop people's technique to the point where they can actually do some of these things. And so if you think you're going to watch a video and just go to your table and tinker and kind of stumble into it, like good luck. But like, this is why I do 3 day boot camps. If I did a 2 hour lesson, I maybe I could work on something really, really small. But I have just found that this game, people really, it's really out of people's comfort zone to do some of the things you need to be able to do in pool. And I just lead people down the path to where they can get 20, 30 years of trial and error in a matter of 3 days. And so that's my plug. I'm just dead serious. I just, if you want to learn how to play pool, come to Minnesota. Okay, that's my plug. And then my funny story is my last student. This is the coolest way. When I asked him how he got into pool, this is the coolest answer ever. One of his friends needed to borrow some money, and he doesn't do unsecured loans. So his friend needed $500 in a hurry. And finally, he said, tell you what, why don't you just hang out to my pool cues? And he didn't get paid back. So then he's like, well, I got these pool cues. And he started hitting balls. And next thing you know, he fell in love with the game. So there you go. That's a new pool player was born. What do you think of that?
Well, that's a cool intro to the game. That's not everyone's story for sure.
Anyway, I just thought it's kind of funny. So okay, that's what I had to cover. Um, now that I've broken the ice, You played the Brendan Crockett Memorial, which is really cool. So is that out of Oscar's room in Hard Times?
Yeah, it's in Sacramento, Oscar's place.
And how far away are you again? You're like within an hour?
No, I'm in LA.
Oh,
LA,
never mind. You're 4 hours
yeah,
then or something. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a 6 hour drive or something like that. It
California's
depends on
big,
how
man.
fast you drive, but I flew, and
Okay.
so yeah, and there's a because I live in LA, there's an airport, Burbank Airport, that has like scheduled flights to Sacramento and back, like every hour and a half, something like that. And just because there's so many people going back and forth between Sacramento and LA, so I just hopped on one of those, and it was easy, cheaper flight, and I have family that lives there, so I just stayed with them, and it was, yeah, pretty cheap trip considering what I'm there for. The most expensive part is the time away from the family, so that's it.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. They need to, maybe Elon and Oscar can partner up and make one of the bullet trains where they just get the thing going like 700 miles an hour and it just, anyway.
I
All
think
right.
there was I think there was like a plan to have a bullet train go through the high desert to Vegas, and it be like an LA to Vegas trip in like 30 minutes or something.
That's what I'm
But
saying.
I don't know. I don't think that's happening. But
Yeah, yeah. All right. Okay. So cool. So you went to the Brendan Crockett Memorial. I might be able to make it next year. That would be fun, man. That'd be a fun tournament to go to. So in any case, it's exciting for you because it brought in some, like, who are some of the top players that brought in? Did it bring in international players or mostly like top national players? Give me some examples.
yeah, I think there were some international players, if you'd call them that. Maybe they're more local now, but there were a few snooker players that played, a high level of pool, even though they're snooker players. And then there was, Tyler, Oscar, um, who won it? Ruben Bautista won it.
Okay. Was
Uh,
it a Mosconi Cup points event?
no, 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 no. It's
Okay.
10 ball. So
Oh,
so
okay.
yeah, Mosconi Cup's all 9 ball, WNT. It's got to be Pro Tour stuff. But so this is probably the biggest 10 ball tournament that's not a pro tournament, right? It's not like sponsored by Predator or broadcast or anything like that. But it is one a lot of pros go to, and so that was fun. I drew Max Everly. That was nice. I played him on the streaming table.
Ooh,
My first
cool.
match. That was fun.
First match, right into the fire. Oh man,
It's what
how,
it is.
how'd that go?
It went okay. Actually, I played the whole weekend. I played pretty well. For my bar, at least. I probably played my B+ game. Um, A- in some spots, B- in others, but I played pretty well for myself, I think.
Cool.
So I mean, with Max, it was on the streaming table, so obviously a little bit nervous. I wasn't crazy nervous through the whole thing. I was kind of like, I had told myself beforehand that I needed no expectations going in because I knew the quality of player that were going to be there. And I don't compete. A lot of people that know me, they think like, oh, you have this YouTube channel, you must be out there all the time playing. Like, I'm a family man. I don't really compete as much as people might expect me to. So I have no expectations going in. It's just as soon as I got there, I won. Now my job is just win matches that I feel like I can and have fun and just absorb it. And I feel like that's what I did. And so playing Max, I felt nervous for the first rack. He broke dry, and then on rack number 1, he broke dry. I ran to the 8 ball. I got on the rail, and then I missed the 8 ball because it was a little funky, and I used a little bit of side spin. And then I missed maybe 2 or 3 other balls that were very, very missable shots. And then I made a lot of other balls when I was supposed to. And so the score was 7-2 at the end of the day. And he ran out a couple times, broken ran a couple times, I think. And then he put me in jail a lot. I didn't expect him to be as defensive as he was, but maybe it's because I knew Max a little bit. We had talked before. So I don't think he underestimated me, which is kind of a compliment, right? But it also means he's playing a little different, I think, than someone who's a no name, which is
What size? Well, hang on. What size pockets were they? Were they really tough?
no, they were standard. There were
Okay.
standard
Okay.
diamonds. There's one diamond there that's 4 inches, but I never played on it.
You know what I think is it's possible that it's like when the top elite pros, the guys that are 780 through 840 or whatever, when those guys are playing and they're playing well and they're breaking well, if they're breaking in two balls and getting good shots on the one, 10 ball can just look like a run out game where it just looks like it's easy and they just run rack after rack. But you'd be surprised at the amount of time if you go down like two tiers and you get the guys like Max Eberly who are very very good players but aren't at the highest level,
Right.
and then you put them on a table where maybe they're not breaking quite as well, or the balls aren't spreading quite as well, or the pockets are a little tight, or they're not quite zoned in on with the pressure. I'll tell you what, it's amazing how it it's almost like there's two guys I knew that were around 580 Fargo that were playing a race to 15 bar table 8 ball. And they were getting ready to play this big set. They were talking about how many break and runs they're going to have and how they need to get their break working. And there's going to be threes and fours. Like in that entire race to 15, there was like 2 or 3 break and runs the whole set. And you might think, well, how is that possible? I mean, 8 ball, you just break and run. It's like, yeah, but you get on the stream, you put the money up on the lights, everything gets tough, man. And it's people are shot. And I played a match, a race to 25 a few years ago, a pretty big set against a guy that we were both over 700 Fargo. And like there was in a race to 25 10 ball, there was very few break and runs, very few break and runs. It was just grindy the whole time. And it's like there's times when you're comfortable and you're breaking good and you're getting into a rhythm where you can put up a 3-pack or something, and you feel like, oh yeah, that's how 10 ball should look. But a lot of times, so my guess is not that Max was playing differently because of who you were or anything like that. I just think that that's actually what 10 ball looks like, unless we get spoiled watching the top players, is all I'm saying. It's like that's actually what 10 ball looks like most of the time.
For sure, for sure. I think the I mean he played lights out pretty much that whole match. I think he missed a ball, 2 balls maybe. It was it was a really good experience though. I wasn't mad about it. It was a tough draw.
Tough draw. How many players? Like 128, something
100,
like that.
157.
Yeah, yeah. And where was Max in terms of like, was he like in the top 10 or 20 in the
Yeah,
field? Probably.
yeah, something like that.
That's a tough draw. Yeah, yeah. So then,
I remember seeing him at the end of the last night. So I don't know if he was playing, but I saw him. Yeah.
So then on the B side, tell me about your quickly. Of course, we want to get in the zone. I don't need
Yeah,
to hear every ball, but
I'll go fast. Let's say I lost to Max, and then I had to wait all day to play my next match, and because they were so behind, I ended up playing my next match at 11 p.m. that night.
oh,
And then and it was against a local player. I forgot her name. Forgive me if she watches this. She's gonna be mad. A cat. Her name's Cat. Plays pretty good. And then I won that match 7-3 or something like that. 7-4. All my matches were lopsided. Either I won 7-2 or something like that, or I lost 7-2. And so I lost 7-2 to Max, and then I won the next few. And then at 1 a.m. that night, I played Carl Wilson. Do you know who Carl Wilson is?
no.
Very strong player. He's the manager at Hard Times. He like regularly plays pros and maybe beats them. He's a very strong player. I got really lucky. He was working all day because he just missed balls he wasn't supposed to. This is what it's like when you have short races. It's like sometimes you just get a guy who plays really well and then hangs a few balls, and then you get the opportunity to make them. So so I beat him 7-2, and he took out Margaret Steyer earlier in the day, like 7-4 or something like that. And so I felt pretty good beating him, but I also knew he gave it to me. And then a couple other matches with some local strong players. And then I lost to a national snooker champion. I can't even pronounce his name. I have no idea what his name was. Iranian guy, something like that. Yeah, he didn't play like a snooker player though. He played like a pool player. Yeah, he had snooker form, but the guy chose shots you don't expect a snooker player to shoot. So
how far did you get then? What place did you get in?
One out of the money.
Like 33rd, 25th through 30, or like
yeah, 33rd, yeah,
33rd through 48th.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah. So well, good job, man, and winning that set against Carl and making that run and then just playing your game, even when you didn't get there, just being able to deliver a game that you feel good about, and just getting in the ring, just getting in the ring. So what are your takeaways? Like if you what were some of the things as you're driving home or flying home, as as you're sitting on that plane, like what were some of the things that experience showed you?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that if I'm in the right headspace, I can hang, you know. uh it's less to do with like a learning, like an actual, like, here's what I learned about my game. It's more of a confidence booster than anything else, you know. I
Yeah.
because there's a guy who doesn't compete, going to a big tournament like that feeling like, oh, maybe I shouldn't really be here. But I played well enough to convince myself that I do belong there, so that's a big thing for me.
That's a huge deal. So, and it was kind of going back to like what I was saying about how we think the game is, because we watch. I used to call it AccuStat syndrome, where back when I was a kid, I would rent AccuStats tapes or buy. That was the only way to watch top pool. But what you
Yeah.
would be doing is you'd be buying the tapes of the finals matches. So you're watching the best players in the world, and you're only watching the top 10 because you want to see the best. So you're watching the top 10 players, and then you're seeing them on top of their game when they're in the finals. You're not seeing the early round matches where they're scraping through or dogging out, because you're only watching the guys that are winning the tournament. And then you're watching, and then you cherry pick the set for the ones with the big runs or the Accu, and then you get the ones that are, oh, this guy shot a 960. This will be a good set. And then you watch it, like, man, these guys play so good. But then my biggest takeaway when I first started going to pro tournaments, it was just eye opening how normal so many of these players looked. And so like I was saying, you'd think people are running 5 packs of 10 ball everywhere, but really, um, Steve Miserak said this about straight play. He said people think that you got to run like 100 balls every turn to compete. He's like, the fact is, if you can run 28 balls and play safe, and then just try not to give the other guy the table too often, you can win a lot of matches just running a rack or two, and then controlling the table. He said you don't have to have any huge runs, and that's the real pool. And then the other thing that what you're saying is kind of cool is like when you don't go to these tournaments, it's just this idea in your head of like, man, there's these tournaments and I don't know how to do it. But when you get there and you walk, you kind of go through it, and then you're like, okay, I can see that guys give you chances, and then you shoot the balls in, and then I can see how sometimes they don't always play their game, and then sometimes you get a good draw, and sometimes you play a good game and come with some shots, and they don't like the way it's going, and it's like all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I've got to work on some things and I've got to play my game, and I'm not always going to win, but like you start to see when you're actually there, it stops being this vague idea of
Mhm.
this how would I ever win matches at a pro event, and it starts being like, okay, I'm gonna have to make that shot and do this, and it's like you see the path to victory, even if it's not an easy path. At least the path becomes visible.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole idea of like, I live so vicariously through watching pool online, right? Again, because of my time constraints, and my lifestyle. Because I don't get out so much, I watch so much of these same guys that I'm, there with in person. And so when I see them struggle with things on the table that I don't see them struggle with on the TV, right? That's huge, because that's literally the whole gap, pretty much. Now I'm not saying that I can go play Fuller and beat him a set, but I am saying that it humanizes a lot of what you expect our hurdles to be too big.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of times it's bigger in our mind than it is in real life, and
Yeah.
that as we talk about mental game and stuff, it's like, well, you can really, it could be an insurmountable, like the question of, do I have within me what it takes to beat Shane in a major tournament? Well, that's kind of an overwhelming question. But
Yeah.
then when you're on the table and the question is, can I make that shot and get on that 9 ball and then just pocket the 9? Well, that's more manageable, and it becomes like, I don't know, it just becomes more manageable, and so I would encourage, the same way I encourage everyone that's serious about training pool, to come check out MN Pool Boot Camp. Got to get in the ring, guys. Got to get in the ring. And so good job getting in the ring. That's exciting. And did you feel motivated as hell when you got home to just work on your game
Oh yeah.
nonstop?
Oh, for
Super
sure. I was
cool.
maybe like the 2 days later, I'm like, hey, I'd like to go play pool tonight, and my wife is like, what are you talking about? You just played pool for a whole weekend. So it's like,
Yeah.
I again, nothing against her. Love my wife, but look, you can't. It's really tough to be like a head down pool player and be a family guy at the same time. I feel it's tough out there for other guys like Oscar. I mean, he owns the place, and still he's got a family, he's traveling and all this stuff. It's
It's
ridiculously hard to keep up with.
well, the hardest part is when you get home from a tournament like that is so motivating because you're like, all I have to do is if I do exactly what I did before, that gets me this deep in the tournament and one out of the money and this deep and this many sets I won. And if I could just hit a couple of shots a little better, I can see how that can get me to the final 16 and then playing to get in the Calcutta. Like I'm just a couple strokes away and I think I can do it. And you're just hungry to work on it, so motivated. And then all of a sudden you got kids, wife, family, job, and all this stuff, and you don't get to the table. And next thing you know, it's like life runs you over and all that energy gets kind of, and the focus and energy gets diffused, and it's just so hard. And that's why full-time players are always going to have an edge in that sense because they just can out invest the, in terms of focus and energy. But there's no trade-off. I mean, of course there's, you gotta, what I always think about is one of the best movies, one of my favorite movies. So maybe I'll see if I lose you here. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Okay.
Do you know The Last Crusade? No. Okay.
I've seen them all.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember which ending is that.
It's the one with the Holy Grail. The Holy
Grail.
Okay. Yeah. So the scene where this Elsa, like, basically she's after the Holy Grail, and it ends up the floor cracks open and it's sitting in some crevice, like some fall to the, the earthquake tears open the ground, and it's like people are gonna fall into the hollows of the earth. And the Holy Grail is on a ledge. It's fell like 12 feet down, and Indiana's got her hand and she's reaching for the Grail. And he says, "Hey, dear, give me your other hand. I can't hold you." And she's like, she could just touch it. She's like, "I almost got it." And then finally she ends up going for it and falls to her death. Yeah. And then next thing you know, Indiana falls and he's hanging and his dad's got him. And then he can touch the Grail. And now it's him that wants to just get the Grail. And he wants it so bad. And all of a sudden, Sean Connery, his dad says, "Junior, let it go." And he finally he gives up the Grail and he gets pulled out. And I always think about that. It's like, I feel like that when you come back from a pool tournament, it's like you could just get your finger on that Grail. You just want it so bad. And then you just got to let it go and go back to work.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great analogy.
It'll be there, man. It's okay. Part-time. And that's why, though, it is fun. One little tidbit and one thing I try to do. That's why I like going to, if I could only play so many tournaments a year, I like to put, instead of playing like a tournament every 2.5 months and play 5 a year, I'd rather play like a couple times a year where I play 2-3 tournaments back to back, so that I like to say I'm a part-time full-time player, where I'll go play for I'll play Derby and Turning Stone, and I'll make January, February like tournament months where I'll play like 3 events, and then I don't really compete again until August, but it's like at least then for that month I get to feel like a full-time player for just a little bit. But I don't know. It's tough action, man. Cool. Yeah. Well, cool. Good job, man. You're a beast. So okay. This is a smooth transition. That couldn't have said it better. Speaking of the zone, I don't know. That was choppy. I can edit that. Anyway, okay. So here's what's interesting. When it comes to the zone, it's kind of everybody knows what the zone is, and dead stroke, and your mind is out of the way, and the cue is shooting the shots for you, and you're just a quiet bystander watching your body do everything without any kind of encumbrance. And that's great. We kind of know what the zone is. And, and there's always the question of how do you get there? And what is this, and what is that? And I've always come at it from kind of a mental game approach, as how do you get your head in the right space to maximize the chances of that happening? But where you're a little different is you went down a road of learning. I'm going to let you speak more about this because maybe you can clarify, but from what I gather, you're looking at more like the science or the research side of things. Like what is the zone? What is your brain doing differently during the zone? And how does your brain actually, the physiological effects? So that's what we want to hear a little bit about from you, is the physically, what is going on? What is the zone from a scientific standpoint?
Okay. I feel like I should first say, yeah, like what you're saying, everyone thinks that the zone is the cue is doing the work, all the glorification of flow, right? All those things. Oh, I ran a 5-pack and I don't even remember it, that kind of thing. that's not what I am. That can be a byproduct of what I'm focusing on, but by and large, I'm not saying that if you do these things or if you learn this, you are always going to just snap into it and suddenly you're Shane, right? Um, so I want to get that out of the way because there's actually a lot of content I think online just about flow states in general, right? Where people are like, you want to learn to enter flow state every time, do this technique or whatever. Like that's kind of bull, you know, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Um, you know, biologically, we are limited to a certain amount of flow. You're using these chemicals that are stored in your brain, and then after they're depleted, it's not like you can just like snap your fingers and do it again. There's a whole process to it. And when I say process, not like a pre-shot routine process, not something that you control, but something that, you know, even if you have control over yourself, you don't have control over exactly when certain, you
Well, it
know.
would be like if you're in a danger spot and your body starts producing a lot of adrenaline, and then you've got heightened focus and maybe your muscles are reacting a little differently. That's
Mhm.
great, but that's a short term thing. It's not like you could just always be adrenaline up. That's not how the body works. So there's a limited amount of, at some point you got to get tired and go to bed. You know what I mean? So that's a process that the body goes through, but it's not a process you're always in control of. That's
Right.
as an analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I think before we talk about flow, or before we talk about how to get in flow and what that is like, and maybe things you can do to get your flow proneness sort of heightened, right? Ready to get in there a little quicker. Uh, I think you have to ask what it is. So most people just say, you know, oh, I slip into flow all the time. It's something that I trigger when I practice by listening to certain music or whatever it is. That's not, I don't care who you are. If you're saying that, you're lying. Uh, but flow is it's a state of consciousness, right? We have multiple states of consciousness. I don't want to sound too woo woo or whatever, but it is. Um, so it's a state of consciousness where you sort of feel your best and you perform your best at the same time. Um, uh, there are studies, and I highly recommend going to listen or watch or read any of Stephen Kotler's work. He's kind of like the leading guy on flow state science right now. There are others. I think he has a partner, Ryan Doris, um, and they have a lot of content out there you can watch or read, and they got a lot of really good information. But Stephen Kotler likes to explain it like it's a state of consciousness where you feel your best and you perform your best. You got, you know, productivity increases through the roof, many times over. Creativity, problem solving, and there's different types of flow as well. There's individual flow and then there's group flow. I won't go over group flow because that doesn't really pertain to us right now. Um, but individual flow, there are different types of flows as well for different things, and that's just the different balances of neurotransmitters firing in your brain. So, uh, yeah, anytime you've ever heard of like I'm in the pocket, I'm in the zone, or I'm playing unconscious, things like that, that's flow. Um, in general, flow. Um, Let me gather my thoughts real quick. I want to see where I start because I don't want to start in the deep end. Um, Yeah, okay. So it's a state of consciousness, kind of like waking and sleeping, right? There's a sort of in between state where you're drifting off and stuff like that. There's a lot of different science behind what exactly is going on. Um, those are different states of consciousness, right? And your brain actually operates on different wavelengths in those different states of consciousness. I don't want to say operate because at all times, all brain waves are firing just at different levels, right? So primarily right now, you're listening to me speak, you're in beta wave sort of state, right? You have a high beta, um, and then low alpha, gamma, theta, delta, that kind of stuff. And brainwaves, if we want to get into it, brainwaves are a whole different part of this about how your brain works and what each brainwave is. or category of brainwave is used for. But they are important to flow and in flow triggers, especially in flow proneness. So maybe when I get there, I'll talk about that.
So I'm going to say this now. This is not accurate, but like in my caveman brain, the way I'm kind of looking at this is it's almost like what you're saying is there's different states or different frequencies your brain can run at, the same way that like different things will light up different parts of your brain if you're trying to solve a math problem versus if you're listening to music or if you're telling a joke, like different, whatever. So what I'm kind of picturing is that there's some brain states that are more effective for performance than others. And so if we're using one part of the brain that's using blah 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 brain wave frequency, it can work a little, but if we can somehow get another part of our brain to take over, it's just at a different frequency, it's going to be a more effective performance. Is that
Yeah,
something like that?
yeah, yes and no. So yes, you want to use different parts of your brain, but just because you're using one part of your brain over another, that doesn't exclusively mean that you're operating on a certain brain wave, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. So, and that's all stuff you don't really need to know about. But what you do need to know is that, yes, your brain operates in a bunch of different ways, and then you want to be using certain parts of your brain over others. The issue is you can't really control it. So you have to trigger it. You have to catalyze it with something. Real quick, before you get into it, you have to understand that trying to get into flow is almost like really trying hard to do something. It's like the harder you try, the harder it is to get there.
There's a story about this guy who wanted to be like he wanted to learn to be like a Zen master, and he sees this guru, and he says, "How long will it take me?" He's like, "I'm a really
Oh
hard
yeah.
worker." Yeah, and the guy says 10 years, and then the guy says, "No, you don't understand. I want it really bad. I'll work even harder than anybody." And he's
Yeah.
like, 20 years. And every time the guy assured him how hard he was going to work, it got longer. So the problem with that is that the part of your brain that desires flow state and wants to control the process of flipping into flow state is actually the wrong part of the brain. And
Correct.
yeah. And so the more you try, the more you're shifting frequency. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So so it's kind of counterintuitive. It's almost like did you ever see Limitless?
Yeah, but I don't remember much of it.
Yeah,
Maybe I
it's like
would if I was using the last 10% of my brain.
yeah, right. It's like guy takes a pill and suddenly he's using all of his brain instead of
Yeah,
10%.
yeah.
First of all, that's wrong. It's not really 10%. It's like 10% of any one place at any one given time. But it's not. That's not like the real way the math shakes out on that. But so a lot of people would think, oh, flow state is you're using all of your brain all at once, right? It must be like your brain on steroids, but it's the opposite of that. So it's you're using less of your brain, or at least you're thinking about what you're doing less to access more of what your brain has to offer more quickly.
You know what it reminds me of is when it comes to learning a new shot or the stroke, people are always doing too much. Whenever I teach them a new shot,
Right.
they're hitting it too hard, moving their arm too quick, they're jumping up. And I always say, pool is not like sculpting where you're adding pieces to build a pool game. Pool is like whittling, where you're just carving away more and more crap that doesn't belong and try to get to a nice minimalistic what's the minimum amount of brain activity we can use to get this, or the cue activity. and
Yeah.
and
What's that?
the other thing that you so one thing that, and because we've trained mental game together, and so that like when we were talking about flow state, just the desire to get into flow state, I've always talked about like the desire to get into flow state is one of the biggest obstacles, and that's
Yeah.
why like letting that go. So anyway, that's I wanted to close that thought loop in my mind, letting go of the desire to get into flow state and just being willing to take it when it comes, and kind of go through the ride a little bit, accepting that we don't always get what we want goes a long way, letting go of expectation. But then back to your current point about it's not about limitless, we're using all of our brain, where it's minimalist, where we're carving away lots of brain activity that's not needed for what we're doing.
Right. So that's actually there's a name for that. It's called transient hypofrontality. And I'll say it again: transient hypofrontality. Transient means passing for amount of time, not permanent, right? Hypo is the opposite of hyper. Hypo means off or slow. And then frontality means the front part of the brain, frontal cortex. So parts of your frontal cortex where you do all of your processing, problem solving, a lot of like motor skills, that kind of thing. That a lot of that shuts off. The part of our brain that keeps track of time shuts off too. So for a passing amount of time, the front part of your brain turns off, right? Transient hypofrontality. And what it does is you get this cool thing called time dilation, where, like, let's say you're in the middle of a conversation. If you slip into flow, suddenly 30 minutes turns into 3 hours and you don't know where it went. Or the opposite is true. If you're in a high-speed car crash and things feel like they slow down, or maybe not that they slow down, but you're taking in so much information, you're like, why am I noticing this thing in the middle of a car crash? That kind of thing, right? A lot of people have that kind of slowing down like experience. All of that is the same part of the brain shutting off. So it's an efficiency exchange where all the energy that goes through the frontal cortex to get your conscious self doing or thinking, saying whatever certain things, it is diminished to the point where all of that energy is now used in the subconscious part of the brain to be able to take over and utilize what the rest of your brain knows, what your body instinctually knows, and then you get a very different mix of neurotransmitters. So there's norepinephrine or noradrenaline, same thing, dopamine, anandamide, serotonin, oxytocin. All those neurotransmitters are things that sort of spike in a flow state, and you don't really get there until you're the part of you that is very conscious of yourself, which is, again, frontal cortex. You're very conscious of yourself. That turns off. So in flow state, you'll get a lot of people who say, oh, it was like an out of body experience, or it was like I was watching myself do this thing. That's where that comes from, because that part of the brain shuts off. And I'm sort of honing in on this first, because it's a really important part of how the rest of it works. You can't have flow state if you don't have transient hypofrontality.
Okay.
So, sorry. All good. Let me mute that. So, yeah. Let's see. I have a little list of things that I might want to talk about.
Yeah. So if that's kind of what's going on during flow state, what are the limits to sustaining that? How can people maximize the chances of getting in? Because I mean, there's so many ways we could go. I want to make sure we go places that I'm sure that these are questions people have. So,
right.
Why is there a limit to staying in flow state?
Kind of like a car running on gas, right? If you run out of gas, the car can't go anywhere, right? You only have a certain amount of neurochemicals that your brain can actually produce and use, and usually, for the duration of whatever task is at hand while you're focusing, flow is a state of hyper focus, right? So if something takes you out of the focus, suddenly those neurotransmitter levels stop and flow is over. So as long as you are sustaining that focus or in the right mindset, in the right balance of neurochemicals, then you can keep that depletion going. But there's it's a biological reason why we can't continue to use flow state whenever.
Do the pros who are doing competition every week and most days, can they build up a tolerance, or can they build up their stamina when it comes to how long they're able to sustain this focus level?
I don't. Let's separate focus from flow, right?
Okay.
Because flow state is a state of hyper focus, but that doesn't mean that if you're focusing, you're in flow, right? So the first thing I would say that if you want to get into flow more often, you have to learn to focus longer. Sorry about all the noise here. Yeah, if you want to get into flow more often, you need to learn to focus and focus longer. There are different exercises for that. Like there's something called like training your attention capacity. What's it called? Like fixed point gazing. It sounds really stupid, but like if you light a candle and just tell yourself you're going to look at this candle without blinking as long as you can, you'd be surprised how much longer you can stare at a candle without blinking, like if you just train yourself to do that. And what you're doing while you're putting yourself through that, almost like, running certain drills or doing certain mechanics training, whatever it is in pool, you got to embrace the suck a little bit, right? It's got to suck for a little while, and you have to overcome through grit the perseverance that it takes to do a monotonous, boring task in order to train your focus to hold on to something when you're not exactly active, right? So that's like a lot of people that talk about flow training, they talk about focus training. So actionably, if there's something you want to try to do, even in pool world, if it's just running drills, as much as I hate it, right? I don't want to be doing one drill over and over because I think it's going to make me better. But from a mental standpoint, I don't enjoy something like pattern drills, like a layout drill where it's I set a specific layout and then I try to run that over and over and over. I don't love those drills because in my mind, while I know I'm trying to build certain skills to get from one ball to the next in a specific way, I also know that this layout's never going to come up in a game. Why am I drilling this? But part of it is if you are performing those kinds of drills, it's more mental than it is physical at times, right? It's the grit to get through it more than it is anything else. So it's a trainable thing. And I'm not saying that if you do these kinds of drills that you're going to slip into flow. I'm
Well,
saying,
so let me jump in. So first of all, if we ever train together, I'll show you why. You'll look at pattern setup pattern drills
oh
totally
yeah,
different when we're done together. But anyway, I could get you hooked on those because there's parts of it that are really really cool. But
well,
anyway,
I still do them. I just don't like them.
no, I understand, but it might change anyway.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
here's what I would say about like when you're talking about focus training and embracing the suck.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like if you're driving across country with your kids in the back seat of the car. If they're crying the whole time and fighting with each other, and are we there yet? And I need to go to the bathroom, and I'm hungry, and we just ate, and all that. It's like, man, if they're miserable and making you miserable, like that's going to be a long drive. On the other hand, if they're having fun and listening to music and pointing out signs and joking around and or taking naps, it could be totally pleasant. And what I would say is like when it comes to training, doing a tough drill or embracing the suck, getting through something that's difficult. There's there may be a tough road. Like, okay, I'm going to sit here and do this drill for hours. It's going to be really difficult. But the hard part about it isn't the road. The hard part about it is the kids that are screaming in the back. And that's your brain. That's your brain.
Yeah.
And so what happens is when you're doing this drill, if you're like whining like a little kid in the back of a car where you're like, God, I hate this and I don't want to be doing this and this is so terrible and I'm so bad at this. I wish I just knew how to do this so I didn't have to do this anymore. Blah blah. It's like, whoa, man. Now you can still force yourself through it, but it's going to be miserable. And what I'm really good at, like I've got my weaknesses, but one thing I'm really good at is putting my kids in control, putting that part of my brain to where it's like I may not enjoy this. It may not be what I want to do, but I can get to the point where that voice, that whiny, complainy voice, gets real quiet, and it's just like, yeah, 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 it's okay. And I know how to nurture that voice, and I know how to manage that voice to where it gets real sedated and chill, and then I can do what I need to do, and it's not so miserable after all the miserable part is really not what we're doing. The miserable part is our own voice in our head complaining about it. And I've gotten pretty good at managing my own complaints. So anyway, when we talk about focus training and we talk about ways that people can build focus training, and then that goes to the same thing about getting into zone too, which is that voice is also not the right part of the brain that you want involved if you want to open up the possibility of hitting flow state.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about kind of some what's going on a little bit in your brain when you get in a flow state. We talked about some things you can do to access that, which is basically you can do some focus training and you can learn to quiet certain parts of your brain that aren't really involved.
Yeah,
Is there anything more you wanted to say about that? Or
yeah, whether it's like breathing exercises or meditation or however ever it is to that you get your body to calm down. People talk about breathing exercises all the time and not to be, hop on that train. Geez, I'm sorry about the sound. Not to hop on that train, but I mean, that's true. Like breathing exercises work. Your heart rate is connected to your breathing. Your brain waves are connected to your breathing. Lots connected to your breathing. So that is something that I do. I don't know about you, but that's something that I do is I do some breath work.
yeah, and I would also recommend one thing that's nice about breathing is that there's no judgment. You never think, I'm breathing so bad right now. I need to breathe better. Breathing is something that there's no emotional judgment tied to. And I talk about hyper focus and flow. To me, there's a difference. There's a hyper alert. So there's the observation, detached observation. You're very aware,
Yeah.
but you're not emotionally and judgmentally involved. And so for me, one of the barriers to flow is, like I said, the whiny kid part. And it's all the emotional and the judgment and the attachment. And so one of the things I think is letting go of that emotional cloudy judgment stuff and letting that kind of calm. By focusing on breathing, you're focusing on something that you're not as worked up about. And so the other thing I like to do is that I will be paying attention to what's going on at the table, but I try to do it more and more detached and disinterested as opposed to, you know what I mean? Like even my own mistakes and stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm not hitting them the way I want to. I tend to be I'm undercutting these balls a little bit and they're not going in the pocket cleanly, or I'm not really accelerating through the ball like I want. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe I'll try to make a point of enjoying the swing a little
Right.
bit more, but it's all kind of like observational as opposed to
Yeah.
judgmental. So
Yeah.
these are, yeah.
Yeah. There's a flow is kind of about, again, not to sound very woo, but balance, right? It's a balance between at least in training for me, like what you're saying, it's a detached observation. Like imagine this is what I do sometimes. I just imagine commentary in my head and
Mm-hmm.
I detach my own voice or my own inner thoughts to that commentary. And I just say, oh, that if he had done this instead or whatever it is, maybe you do it differently, but
Absolutely. And even if you get upset, like, oh, I'm so mad I missed that, then you can even step back and be like,
yeah,
no, Demetrius seems to be disappointed with that shot. And because even that frustration is not who you are. That's just a part of your so yeah, so just everything you have to like remove yourself. You are not, like you're saying, the frontal cortex, when you have that out of body experience, you are not your frontal cortex. That's just a part of your brain that's part of your machine. And when you
right.
can step back and let it run and just watch that thing play out and watch the stories you're telling yourself and be like, okay, that's yep, I can see that Demetrius was disappointed with that shot. Fair enough. But even that you can take a step back from.
Right. I might be wrong, but I think that's the neurochemical anandamide. It's like responsible for that feeling of oneness with your surroundings, universe. It's associated with like love and acceptance and stuff like that, right? Not to be confused with serotonin and oxytocin, which are kind of in that similar camp. I could be totally wrong about that. Someone check me. So I don't want to make it sound like though that in order to get into flow that you need to be very like meditative guru on top of the hill, whatever it is, because flow actually almost requires a level of challenge that is outside of just relaxation. They literally call it the flow channel, right? So there's on a graph of skill and challenge, there's a ratio that you need to sort of, I don't want to say abide by, but there's a level of challenge that needs to just ever so slightly exceed your skill in order to keep your focus on the task at hand, to get yourself to sort of overcome your own boundaries in skill level to obtain whatever it is goal that you're trying to go for. So they found that the magic number is about 4%. So if my skill level is X degrees at 100%, my challenge needs to be just ever so slightly tougher than that in order for me to very easily naturally slip into flow. So when it comes to flow triggers or flow proneness, you want to find yourself constantly in situations where what you're doing exceeds your capability, but not so much that you get anxious over it, and not so little that you get bored over it. Right? Apathy and anxiety.
This is a cool thing. So let me I'm going to answer my own question, because then there's a question like, well, what happens when you're playing guys that are much weaker than you or much stronger than you, and it's not 104%? Not everybody you play is going to be 104% of your level. So my answer that I want to hear yours would be, I'm not competing against them. I'm thinking about how I'm likely to perform against them on average, and then I'm trying to see if I can outperform my normal performance against them, and perform 4% better against this guy than I normally would, or something like that. Yeah.
You have to change your goals or change your expectation in the face of whatever you are given in your circumstance, right? So like if I'm playing Max Eberle and I'm only supposed to get 3 games off of him, okay, maybe I try to get 4, but that is a very specific goal and expectation that I can't think about during the match. That's the thing. This is a really tough part about all of this flow stuff, is that as soon as you give yourself expectations, you're not living in the present, right? They call it the deep now, right? Focusing on only whatever is right in front of you and then leaving the goal aside, but you still need to have a goal. Right.
So one of the things that I had a great pod I did a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, about how to prepare for a match you can't win, when I was playing that long session with Tony Chohan. And one thing I think about, like, instead of a goal, the only concern I have for people that are like, okay, I'm supposed to win 3 games against this guy, I'm going to try to win 4. People might say, well, isn't that a losing mindset? You're not really. And then what happens if you get opportunities to win more, but then you're kind of like mentally preparing to win 4? So one tip I have for that is, I think about how tough it is to be on a stream against Max Eberle as an underdog in front of an audience, and how tough it is to play your game and convert on opportunities, and how tough it is to take advantage of opportunities, because you're being faced to ask questions like, do I have what it takes to win, and am I allowed to win, and can I deliver my game and get the job done in these circumstances, on a train, on a plane, with green eggs and ham? Can I deliver my game now? And you're faced with a lot of adversity that you don't normally have to face. So one thing I like to think about is, I know that there's going to be many spots, if I'm playing in those circumstances, where it could be very tough to play my game. It can be very tough to take advantage of the opportunities I've been given, and very tough to close out racks and mark my beads and all that. And it could be very tough to accept the win and shoot in the 10 ball if I had the opportunity, because I have mental blocks about am I allowed to do this? And so that's going to be challenging. I may not get those opportunities. He may run out a bunch of racks. But if I get those opportunities, I want to do my best to allow myself to take them at a rate higher than how it could be if I was, I just want to be open to taking advantage of those opportunities, and more than I might otherwise if I wasn't in a good state of mind. And that's a little vague as a goal, but that's kind of what I like.
Do you know what the difference is between distress and duress?
No.
So maybe I'll look it up for you real quick. Distress versus duress. So or eustress, sorry, eustress. So there are 2 different types of stress that are different in their effects and how they affect health and well-being. Distress is a negative stress response. Your body or your brain sort of just like injects yourself with cortisol, right? Eurus is a different type of stress that I guess it is hard to just explain.
Is it like the difference between excitement and anxiety? Does that have
Yeah,
anything to do with it?
kind of, but it is still cortisol, right? But what they found is if your body is introduced to stress involuntarily, you get negative health repercussions. But if you volunteer yourself to be under stress, then it becomes eustress, and you get a healthy level of cortisol, and suddenly you're performing better or you're feeling healthier.
So this ties into what I will like to teach with mental game is this is the whole problem. This is another problem with hoping to get in the zone. If you go to the pool hall with the mindset, I hope I get in the zone and everything just flows today, so I'm not challenged with mental distress and pressures. And I hope that just mentally I'm not nervous and tight. I hope I don't get bothered by that. Now we're hoping to hit flow. Well, the problem is we're afraid of not hitting flow. And then when those experiences come up and we're feeling pressure and we're feeling tight and we're feeling nervous and not very confident, now not only are we experiencing those things, but we're experiencing them reluctantly. And we're like, oh no, I'm having to deal with this. I was hoping I didn't have to deal with this. But if you prepare and say, yeah, of course, flow state's great, and I'm going to do everything I can to open up the door for that. But at the same time, if it's gritty and things are tough and I'm nervous and I'm tight and things aren't going that way, then I look forward to seeing how well I can manage through that. And now I'm accepting that could go that way. I have a game plan to manage through that so that I'm going to be more effective because I have a plan for that. And B, because I've got a plan for that, I'm not afraid of that. I'm welcoming it. I'm probably going to handle it a little better in the right eustress, and also because it's not going to bother me so much. It might open up the door to actually get into flow a little easier as well. So I don't know. That's it overlaps with a lot of. I'm just thinking about how this overlaps with how I. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to say it might help you into flow. That's needed to get into flow, pretty much. Yeah. In the same way that was transient hypofrontality is needed for flow.
Yeah,
same
because
with
the same thing is
or
it goes back to what we said about how really wanting to get into flow is like the worst thing for flow, and accepting that it might not happen, no big deal. I'm prepared for whatever comes. That's actually a good state of mind. Okay, so I'm just trying to zoom out so I can remember. We've talked a little bit about what your brain is doing differently during flow, what the limits are, some things that we might do we can't. Now you mentioned triggers. I want to ask you about that, but you talked a little bit about. So we talked a little bit about limits, to how long we can stay in flow, how we can train and maybe prepare. What about these triggers that you said it's kind of hogwash that people say? I listen to what's the Eminem song with the one shot? Palms are sweaty. I listen to a song and I'm suddenly in flow.
Yeah, I know it.
Which one is that? Why can't I think of the name of that song?
You only get one shot.
Yeah, what song is that? How come I don't know the name of that song?
Now you just blocked me, man.
Anyway, everyone in the audience is streaming it. They all know. But okay, the point is, if you can't, what do you mean by triggers? If we can't magically trigger it, talk to me about triggers.
Okay, so in terms of flow research, the word triggers can be two things. So there are the quote 4 pillars of flow, and the last pillar of flow is the flow cycle, of which there are 4 stages of flow, and triggers is really specific in the release stage of flow. But so in flow, in the pillars of flow, there's flow blockers, and then flow proneness, flow triggers, and then the flow cycle that I mentioned. So blockers are like distractions, things that keep you away from it, thinking about your expectations, that kind of stuff. And there's proneness.
Yep.
Wow. Flow proneness, where your brain is naturally open to being in flow, whether or not it's your skill challenge ratio, which actually is a trigger. or it's just your state of consciousness. A lot of people want to do a lot of work early in the morning, literally within 90 seconds of waking up, because their body's already kind of in this flow prone state, right? They're sort of in that in between state. And if they just force themselves to do some sort of focusing work while their brain waves are at those levels, then they get a lot of flow proneness, and they find themselves very productive pretty quickly. So that's one way to do that. Not that that really relates to pool, unless you want to sleep on your pool table. Yeah, and then there's flow triggers, which is, skill challenge ratio, level of focus, goal setting. I believe, maybe I'm wrong now. Last time I checked, there were like 22 different triggers. And some of them are more individual based triggers, and some of them are more group based triggers. Yeah, it all works differently for each person. But again, I'm going to keep going back to, for me personally, the skill challenge ratio, because that is the one that everyone's going to respond to, right? Because flow exists on the edge of your ability, having a goal that exists and a challenge and a task that exists on the edge of your ability is almost mandatory for you to get there.
And so when this is so cool. So I want to zoom in, since this is our big trigger and we kind of already hinted at it or talked briefly about it. To me, what a goal really is it's a story that we're telling ourselves, or it's a narrative that we're creating. It's a movie, like in a movie, you get, here's the main character, here's what their quest is or whatever. It's like, what we're basically saying, a goal is basically like we're creating a movie where we're the actor, we're the main character, and we have a quest. And that quest is to perform at 104%, or to overcome this challenge that's a little bit daunting for us. If you don't have that story, then so that's the importance of narratives and stories, is that if you are playing a guy who's lower skilled than you, and you are telling yourself, I'm way better than this guy, I should be able to freewheel and run this guy over no problem. Well, that story, you're telling yourself, I only need 70% of my skill for this. And then people play 70% of their ability and they play a bad match and maybe they lose. They're like, why do I play so bad against weaker players? It's like, well, look at the story. You only asked for 70%. What if you had a $10,000 car, would you want 7,000 for it? Like, no, you list it for 10.5 and then you settle for 10. It's like, that's what you want. You got to ask for 105. So how do you have to frame a story that asks for 105%. So whatever story you're telling yourself, I don't know. Does that make sense? What am I saying? I don't know.
Yeah, clip that and put it on a short somewhere, because that's the one that people need to hear. Yeah, I think I can't tell you how many times, if I'm on like a Facebook group about mental game, so many posts are about that exact thing. How come I can't beat the guy I'm supposed to beat, or whatever it is, and that's, yeah, you said it. That's the reason. It's a story you tell yourself.
So that, and the story you tell yourself is just a fancy way of verbalizing a goal. You're just verbalizing your goal, because your goal then is to beat this guy, to bring your best and contain him as best you can, and not, to not let the fact that he's a weaker level player distract you from digging deep. All those different things are part of the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I want to I keep recapping, because this is so much going on that I want to make sure that there's some tangible. So we talked about what your brain is doing. We talked a little bit about how to clear actually, we talked a lot about triggers. One trigger was how to clear the clutter, the frontal cortex activity, and how to use the correct goals, so clearance was one. And then the other one was goal setting, to get asking for 105%, to kind of get the right challenge level to help trigger. So those are things you can do to clear the clutter and set up a goal that's going to create the right challenge level to help trigger. Those are some of the things we talked about. Is there anything that you really felt like, now we're not done, but if we were to be done right now, is there anything about those topics that you'd feel like disappointed you didn't cover?
Yeah, I think you can't talk about flow without talking about the flow cycle, because it really is a movement of various stages that get you in and out of flow. And if you don't understand that you need time and certain things to take place within that cycle, then you're just going to be frustrated that you're never in flow and you don't understand why. So I went through the pillars of flow real quick: blockers, proness, triggers, and then the cycle. So the cycle is what I'll get into now. So the flow cycle is a 4-part cycle. It starts with struggle, then goes to release, then flow itself when you're in flow, and then recovery, right? And if you have time to go watch my video on flow on my channel, I go through those phases.
I'll link it in the description. Yeah.
It's called pool and flow. But I go through that, and essentially, so there's the 4 stages: struggle, release, flow, recovery. Struggle is the things we talk about all the time, the training itself, right? How do you get better? It's putting your head down, doing the grit work, persevering through focus training, through whatever it is, running drills, setting yourself up with pressure matches, testing yourself. That's the struggle part. Not that you couldn't enter flow in that section, but struggle, it refers to the learning that's going on, right? And then you have release. So there's struggle, all the learning, all of the stress, all of the effort that goes into prepping yourself to perform. And then there's the release: taking a break, going on a walk, doing something else outside of pool, eat something. There's all kinds of things you can do in a match or when you're training to sort of give yourself a release on the things that you were just struggling with, right? Your brain needs to sort of recalibrate itself so it can get ready to pull that information. And then part of release is also the triggers, whether it's being the flow proness of breathing exercises, being in good mental space, or the triggers of the skill challenge ratio, etc., to actually pull you into flow. That's release. So release into flow is a really short period. Usually it kind of just happens, and that's the thing that people want to try to control. But again, don't control it. It's not something you can really do with a snap. And then there's flow itself, and that'll last as long as it lasts. Maybe it's a couple shots, maybe it's a whole rack, maybe it's a whole night or two, but that's when flow happens. So struggle, release into flow. And this is a big part that people don't really understand about flow is recovery. Your players are always going to perform their best right next to their worst, almost always. It's crazy how it happens, right? Where you're drilling a shot over and over, and then something distracts you, you come back to it and you can't make one. Does that ever happen to you? I don't know. That happens.
Yeah. And my competitor cycle, which is, it's very interesting because I remember I have, and I'll link this as well, because I teach mental game, of course, mnpoolbootcamp.com. Let's go. But anyway, I have this whole idea of why people go through cycles in their game, but it's interesting how parallel that is to the, I don't pretend like I know it all, but it's very, people do definitely go in cycles, and definitely the sun shines brightest after the dark night, or whatever the hell the saying is. I don't know. I don't use that saying, but the point is it's always darkest before the dawn, I think is the saying.
Right.
Anyway, like the fact is that when people are at their worst, what generally, I think one of the reasons is that frontal cortex, the eye, the controlling part, we try so hard. We're so unsatisfied with our play, or dissatisfied with our play, and we're so trying so hard to figure it out and control it and all this stuff. And the more active it is, the more difficult it gets, until finally it releases and surrenders and just lets go and says, well, I can't do this. Apparently I'm not able to do this. And then at some point that frontal cortex and the ego and the controlling part of us either burns out or gives up or surrenders, and finally it quiets down, and then we hit a dead stroke. And so
you're talking about the release stage right there, basically.
So when you're talking about how you struggle, a lot of times your struggle is tied right before your best play.
And also right afterwards as well. So if you're playing your best play, what happens in the competitor cycle, right? You're in God mode, and then suddenly you set expectations on yourself, and those expectations, kill your performance, and you feel humiliated, and then humility, humiliation like lends into humility back into the
and as soon as you start playing great, it's easy to get into that entitlement. It's easy to, and then the frontal cortex comes in and says, "Now I finally got it." It doesn't realize that it's the reason it got it was because it gave up, it got out of the way, and now it tries to come back and take ownership and control of the process again. And So okay. I got a specific question. So you talked about. Let me see if I can name the 4 stages of flow. There's like preparation or something, trigger, flow, and recovery. What is it?
Struggle.
Okay. Struggle. So name the 4 real quick. Name the 4.
It goes struggle and then into release, which is letting go of your sort of ego, right? And then flow, and then recovery is after flow.
Okay. So struggle, release, flow, recovery. And is release the same as trigger then?
No. Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Okay. So struggle, release, trigger, flow, recovery. My question is, when you said you can't talk about flow without talking about this, is for people that are like, how can I use that information to better lead myself and better effectively manage myself? Like, what part of that model? I know, like when I teach mental game, how I do it and why I think it's important, but why did you feel like you had to share that with people? What does that do for people to know
that? I think a big part of it has to do with, so most of the time you're not in flow, right? Like, let's say you're only in flow 1% of the time. 99% of your time you're not in flow, and we want to focus on the 1%, right? But really, that 1%, when we're in there, we're not even focused on it. It's just happening, right? So you have to prep the rest of that 99% to get yourself there and accept what happens. And so the reason I think understanding how it all works is beneficial to not just pool players, but people in general, regardless of what they do, if they want to perform well in life, is you got to understand that it's all sort of linked together. That's why it's a cycle, right? So struggle, release, flow, and recovery. Recovery and struggle are connected, right? It's a circle, cycle. So when you go from recovery into struggle, you have to have a break, a part. It's the part of the cycle where you have to step away and let the learning from the flow cycle sort of inhabit your brain, your body. And part of that is sort of almost like reviewing yourself, like we were saying before, a detached observation, right? That's a big part of not just struggle and training, but also release, being able to step away from what you're trying so hard to do, whether it's literally sleeping and relaxing, or if it's reviewing matches and reviewing your play and take or go into freaking therapy, whatever it is.
So yeah, I have what comes to mind is like, suppose you're playing poker. I think that it's good to know, because you mentioned flow is only like 1% of the time. I know you're just throwing it out there, but like it's not the majority of your time. And so if you want to be an effective pool player, the idea of trying to magically find your way into flow state, like that's somehow going to be your game plan to win, that's not going to work, because it's just not enough of the time. And if you play great 1% of the time and the rest of the time you're melting down and frustrated, it's going to be not an effective pool career. And so I think about poker, and I think about, you only get dealt aces once in a while. Most of the time you get dealt other hands.
Yeah.
And poker's not about how much you win with aces. It's about how much you win with aces compared to how much you lose when the other guy has aces and you don't. And that in the end, some of the things you can do wrong is, if you get frustrated that you haven't got aces for a while, so then you try to force something to happen with tens, and then it costs you a lot of money. Well, that's not going to work. You have to, sometimes when you play poker, the other guy is going to get the cards, he's going to get the luck. Sometimes you're even going to have a losing session. And in the end, you have to budget for that and lose less when you get the bad cards and the bad luck, and win more when you get the good cards and the good luck than what you lose when you don't. And then in the end, that's what a professional poker player is. It's going to ebb and flow, but the ebbs outweigh the flow. The flows outweigh the ebbs, and then you end up positive. That's how it actually works. How people want it to work is I'm so smart that I can just always win all the time. That's not poker. Similarly with pool, people that want to just get up and high and flow state all the time and always have it just, I just want to be unencumbered by negative emotion. I want to be performing with confidence and closing out matches and not, and I just want to be playing good pool and winning. That's not, and I've talked about performance ranges and how you have to manage your whole performance range. And so just accepting that is a big, big deal. And then when it flows, it flows. And when it doesn't. So what advice do you have right now for somebody who's having a bad day?
Oof. A bad day or a bad sort of pool season?
Just a bad day. They're just at the table. They're in an important match,
Huh.
and maybe the guy's got to, maybe that they're just playing. It's a long set and they're just struggling. Their confidence is low. All they can do is figure out ways. All they can see is like, I know that normally I would run these balls out, but right now it just looks, I feel like I can miss every ball and all I can see is things that could go wrong. And a lot of times I find ways to get funny and I just can't get it done.
The first thing I would do is say take a break. If they can take a break, right?
Okay.
Break, step away from the table, even for 2 minutes, right? Fill your brain with something else not related to pool. Let yourself sort of step away from that whole environment mentally, so that when you come back, you can come back and try to start over, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like reset. Yeah.
And that doesn't mean forget what happened. That doesn't mean forget your whatever it is you're working on, fundamentals or your pre-shot routine, all that stuff. It means it means stop trying to brute force it, right? Generally, when people are not performing well and they're upset about it, right? When they're in their feelings about it, that's how you know they're not, prone to being in flow. Now, on the flip side, I think there are moments where you can sort of harness anger and you can harness the emotion side of things, negative emotions, into harness that into performance. But I think that's a much more rare case, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, so we know guys like Earl Strickland, even we heard the story when Shane was playing Sky on the bar table and he was way down and he went outside and threw the water bottle against the wall and came back and King Kong. Sometimes you get so emotional that you can bypass the frontal cortex because you just get into like, I don't care what you have to say anymore. It doesn't, it's another way to reach surrender is to get so angry you stop caring. But there's other ways to do it. And so anger can get there sometimes. It doesn't always. A lot of times people just melt down. I don't use that at all. I don't go to anger, but I find other ways to do it. So, yeah, okay. So I'm sorry. I just wanted to agree with you that anger is not. It doesn't mean it can never work. It's just not the road I would recommend, and it's both
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it doesn't work any better, and it's more miserable to go through. I don't really understand. But what I would say too, and I think I really want people to know is you have to manage through bad days. If sometimes they turn around because, like you said, struggle oftentimes is right before flow. And so just know. So a couple things. One, if you know that when you're struggling your worst, that things can turn around, man. It's never as bad as it feels. You could be down 4-0 and feel like you can't run a single ball, and then you know something flips, and next thing you know, you get an extra opportunity, and something changes in your mind, and all of a sudden you hit flow, and you don't feel like you're hardly behind at all because I'm just having fun running balls, and who cares? And so,
I would.
first of all, you have to know it's understand that it's never as bad as it feels. Like the struggle, just know it can turn around. And the other thing I wanted to say, I'll let you comment on that. But the other thing I want to say is that you have to know that this is part of the game. That it is that I just watched a video of Dennis Arcullo. Somebody linked it. He had a Hill Mill match with Josh Filler, and it showed his Hill run out, and he had like this open 5-ball run, and he was super tight, getting off balls 4 times, trying to figure out what angle he wanted, finding ways to get really funny on balls, getting off the ball 3 times. I mean, it was like super. You just felt doomed watching him run these balls out, and he just got finally he managed to get a flat angle on the 8 where he had to draw for shape, and then he got the worst possible shot on the 9, and then he aimed it 3 times and got off the ball twice and aimed it again and got down and hung the 9, and he was just like, you could tell like the whole thing was doomed. And the point is that I've seen all the top players go through that, and so for people the same way I said that you got to go to competitions like the Brendan Crockett, for you, it's like you've got to get in the ring. It's like you've got to go through struggles, man. You've got to, you want to know how to handle struggles and what to do. Go through them again and again and again and again and again. Because all the top players, they just go through struggles more than you and I do, and not less. They didn't get so good. They didn't get so fundamentally sound and so good at flow state that they just don't struggle anymore. They just go through it for a living, and then they get better at managing through it. They get better at performing when they're playing bad, and they get better at getting out of it when, getting through that cycle quicker. That's what I think. So my tips would be embrace it, get better and better at going through it. And then what you're saying is like taking breaks and kind of resetting a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on the practical side, on what to do with your time, with your body in that moment when you're not playing well. Yeah, take a break or do something else, or find a way to switch your mind onto something else, because pool is not healthy in your brain right now. You need a reset, right? You need to wipe your hard drive before you can build something else. But when it comes to getting back to the table and playing, just like what you're saying, you have to release your expectations if you're gonna if you're gonna perform at all, and that's true not just in pool, and this is something that I learned in your mental course. Not to plug that again, but please take Demi's mental course if you can. It's seriously good. The number one thing I took away from that was, if you're not finding a way to release your expectations from whatever goals you have in the moment, whatever that one thing that's giving you anxiety, or the story that you're telling yourself, the narrative, you kind of have to slip out of that story somehow in order to find performance. And that's absolutely mentally true, scientifically true, biologically true when it comes to finding peak performance in flow state. Is the more you are on your expectations or on the story of what has already happened in your past, the less you are on the moment, right? The less of the deep now that you're in, the more likely you are to not find peak performance.
So what I would say, so my mental game training, it's Zoom training. So people that are all over the country, we can do this by Zoom. I do groups of 3, small groups. I'm actually, yeah, I'm excited. I've got a few people. I could queue another one up, but I've actually got a Zoom 1 pcket deal I'm doing now. But and then I'll do some. So I'm not taking that public yet. I'm doing it with some former students. But I feel like there's a lot. I have some opinions about how to play 1 pcket, Nate, and it's not, to me. I've got some stuff that I haven't seen anywhere. So I'm like, I've got some things to say about it. So I'm doing it with my current students only. And then if it goes well, maybe I'll offer it to the public, but I'm going to test it out first. So, but in any case, I do the Zoom training with the mental game. And for me, it is, seriously about managing the clutter of the stories that prevent flow state. So we can't force flow state, but we can. There's all the stuff you're saying about, okay, let go of expectations that might get in the way of allowing yourself to find flow. But it's like learning how those expectations sneak in, why they sneak in, how to identify and eradicate them and let them go. It's like I have a systematic process for like how to do that and how to manage through that. That it doesn't mean you're going to go to flow all the time, but boy, it like I said, you talk about it having a game plan. It's I'm a big believer. So anyway, okay. So trigger, you wanted to talk, or you wanted to talk about. I'm sorry, I derailed myself. The last point you were just kind of making again. Restate your last point. Just remind me where we were. I got carried away.
We were talking about when a guy's having a bad day,
Yeah. And you were saying the most. Yep. And the last point you made.
The last point I made was just forget about your performance.
Let go of expectations.
Yeah, let go of your expectations. Just play and try your best to enjoy what you're doing, right? Because at this point, for you to come back to the table, that's a challenge in itself, right? So don't worry about setting an expectation on the challenge that you have. It's challenging enough just to get there and say, I don't care what happens. Just play the game, and try to enjoy yourself.
So I want to make sure. Thank you. I want to make sure that I ask this because we've got limited time. Can't stay in flow forever, brother. So anyway, okay. One of the things that's interesting about mental game is that it has to manifest physically. Even when you make mental mistakes, like you lose focus or you get distracted or you get, whatever, you get fearful and tentative, that has to come out somehow. If you shoot the 9 ball and it goes in, the ref doesn't call foul because you weren't in a pure state of mind. That in the mental game, it can start with mental game, but it has to manifest physically. And there are times I like to say you have to develop your physical game as best you can, because there's times you can develop your physical game to the point where even when you're struggling mentally, your physical game can carry through and get at least get that job done at hand. On the other hand, there's times when you want to train your mental game really well to take pressure off your physical game, to put yourself in a good state of mind to allow your body to optimize its performance. So the mental game takes pressure off the physical game, and the physical game takes pressure off the mental game. The same way that playing good position takes pressure off your shot making. But if you get more confident with your shot making, then you don't worry so much about the cue ball. You don't have to be as tight about where your cue ball gets because you have confidence you can shoot it in anyway. So the shot making and position play take pressure off each other. So with that said, I have a chicken and the egg question.
Okay.
Suppose you're shooting and some days your stroke feels so straight and smooth and it's going exactly where you're looking and you have plenty of clearance and everything just feels right. And then other days you're down and you just can't seem to get comfortable on the ball and your stroke seems a little wobbly and it's not going right where you're looking. So now you start hanging up some balls and you're fighting a little bit to get on the ball right, and you're missing balls that you normally might not miss. And now your confidence is low because you're like, man, it's just, I don't know, it's not working really well right now. And then when the more things aren't working, then you can sit there and start trying to think about how to control it and fix it and what's going on. And then you can get panicky and you can get in a bad state of mind. So now you're playing bad physically and mentally. So the question is, which came first? Is it when you're playing poor, is it sometimes you just play poor physically and then it can put you in a negative state of mind? Or is it always mental at the start? Like when we find ourselves uncomfortable and missing balls, is that mental in origin and then it manifests physically? Or might it just be that our physical skills aren't good enough and we allow ourselves to get distraught about it? What starts the process of a bad day?
I think it depends on the person, because for me, when I get to a pool hall and I get a table and I start hitting balls, I have no expectations on how I'm playing. I'm just trying. So for me, I guess it's my body, right? I'm trying to let my body like just get in rhythm, right? But if like let's say I'm on a league team and I have a match and I haven't hit a ball at all, and I'm expected to screw my cues together, get down and lag, and suddenly I'm in a match. You got to think it's mental first at that point. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
it's interesting. I've always wondered about that. Like where does it all start, man? And I do think that it's interesting because it does manifest physically and it can create this illusion that if I just get better physically, then I'll prevent that from happening. But and that does is you got to do both, right? Just like you got to practice your shot making and you got to practice your cue ball. You do have to train physically to where it gets easier and easier, and then like I said, your good days get better, your bad days get better. But it is mental too. It's interesting. I think it's got to be both, maybe. I don't know.
I will say really quickly on like between. I know this is slightly a tangent, but like practicing cue ball versus practicing your shot making, for me sometimes they're the same. Especially lately, for some reason, I'm I, I don't consider myself a good shot maker, but lately I've been a better shot
You
maker.
strike the balls well. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, lately I've been a better shot maker than I have been maybe in the last year or so. And that's, I think, because of how I've decided to change my position play. So when you first start learning the game and you learn about position play, especially with rotation pool, it's all about choosing the shot that has the highest percentage chance of you getting in a good zone for the next angle, right? Um, And so for me, that was always, oh, I just got to play smart. I got to choose the right, shots to come in line to the next shot line well over and over and over again. It should be simple as long as I'm choosing the right shots. But then it's a kind of a catch-22 because if you're missing the shots, it doesn't matter whether or not the cue ball is going into
Yeah,
the right
balancing the
one.
difficulty. Yeah, I watched your video about like stun speed and all that stuff, and about
Yeah,
how there's certain types of things that you can do to improve your striking and pocketing, and that you don't want to give up pocketing percentages, getting fancy with cue ball either. And so building it together to where you're playing cue ball routes that also kind of are also cinch shot speeds and techniques. Yeah, it's knowing, but then the tricky part is when people are learning new cue ball maneuvers, there might be shots that feel like, well, this isn't the way to play it because I'm making the shot too tough by playing it this way. But then after you learn how to play the cue ball that way, maybe it's not. So you have to develop all your tools. And then once you've developed them, then you have the perspective to know which ones are the appropriate tools that
right.
maximize and balance both.
Right.
Um,
That's the place I am in my game right now, where I'm realizing that even though the smartest cue ball is to always sort of come into the line of the next shot, the
yeah.
smartest way for me to run out is to stun the ball so I can get an optimal stroke.
I'm gonna bust that myth because this is like one of my favorite things is like when people learn ideas, they tend to overuse them. For example, a key ball and eight ball. The idea of saving a ball to get on the eight. So the purpose, I get really worked up on this. We don't always need a key ball. So instead of when people look at an eight ball rack, the first thing they usually do is say, well, what's my key ball? And then they find a ball near the eight where if they're on that ball, they can shoot it in and get on the eight. And that's great. But the problem is now they're anchored to that ball being their last shot. What if the eight ball is really easy to get on? And they would be better served using that key ball that they want to save as a breakout for one of their clusters or as a safety valve for a breakout that they need to do. Well, by reserving that and saying, no, 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 that's my key ball. I need that last. Now they're creating more work in other parts of the run than they're solving. So the eight ball, getting on the eight ball was a very, very minor challenge. But now because they're reserving that ball, they're creating other problems earlier in other parts of the racks that are greater. So here's what I would say about a key ball. There is a challenge that needs to be overcome, which is there is a target that we need to land our cue ball in after pocketing our last ball to get a good shot at the eight. We need to find a way to hit that target. And if that target is really small and really inaccessible, then one strategy to ensure we hit that target is to reserve a key ball. But if that target's really big, like let's say the eight ball's hanging, like why would we even think we need a key ball? That's silly. The target's half the size of the table. We don't need a key ball. So to think about, we don't always need a key ball. The point is now we're finding a solution for a problem that doesn't exist because the target on the eight is huge and we can hit it from anywhere. So to me, I don't, and here's something else about how to run racks. Is I don't run racks in order from the beginning to the end, and nor do I go from the end to the beginning. When I read a rack, I go in order of priority. What are the most important challenges first? And then I build, it's like the golf balls go in first, then the marbles, then the sand in the jar. That's how you fill up. I look at what are the biggest problems in the rack and I identify them all, but then I organize my run around the biggest problems. And if getting on the eight is a big problem, then that will then be a priority. But if getting on the eight is not a big problem and there's much bigger issues, then for me to start with what's a key ball, like this is just a backwards approach to reading racks. Okay, how does that relate to the playing with the line? Similarly, playing with the line is a solution to a problem. And that problem is, how do I make sure that my cue ball will hit my target? I have a certain map. I have a certain way to run the rack. I need to make sure that my cue ball will hit the targets that I'm creating in my mind. You should be. So much I want to work with people. Okay. Every shot, it's a series of two things. It's a series of balls you need to pocket, but it's also a series of targets on the table that you need your cue ball to hit in order to continue your run as planned. And so making the ball, hitting the target, making the ball, hitting the target. Now, sometimes you can play to very small targets if you have very accurate cue ball maneuvers that will hit them. Other times you can use wild cue ball as long as you're playing to a large target that can absorb that landing. Where it gets tricky is, okay, sometimes my cue ball is going to have a hard time hitting the target. And so then there are ways to make the target play bigger. 3 ways. 1, you can use rails as brakes to slow the cue ball down. Confidently get somewhere, bump a rail, and it slows down the speed. So you can, okay, rails as brakes. 2, play to the wider part of the zone, except a little bit tougher shot, because if you're back from the shot a little ways, you usually have a little bit bigger landing strip. The zone, basically, you're extending your zone. It's just, man, I'm having a hard time hitting my target. Make that target a little longer, accept a little distance, accept a harder shot, make the target longer, and it widens out. That might be a way to help your cue ball hit your target. But the third way is to play the line of the angle that you want, not necessarily a shot line. You don't always want to be straight. If you want to move, you need a move angle. So play a line down that angle. That's great. That helps solve the problem of making sure your cue ball will hit your target. However, if I've got ball in hand and I'm shooting a ball on the side, it's in the middle of the table, and the ball I'm playing shape for is on the side rail. Well, I could just follow to the side rail. Now I'm crossing the line, though. I'm crossing the line. I couldn't be anywhere perpendicular. But there's no problem because I'm following forward 2 feet and I will hit my zone. So there's no problem. So I mean, I could put the cue ball at a big angle and cut the ball on the side and follow my cue ball to the end rail and back up table. That way it's coming with the line. Well, I thought I was supposed to come with the line. It's like, no, you're only supposed to, if you're having trouble finding a way to get your cue ball to hit your target, then it might be useful to consider options that involve playing the line. So I look at it as this, my overall paramount strategies. When you plan a run, you want to make sure that every shot that in your run is something you're confident you can make. And every cue ball maneuver that you're going to use, you're confident will hit your next target. And if you're struggling to, and then you do your check, can I make all those shots? Can I hit all those targets? And if there's any of those challenges where you're like, boy, it's going to be tough to get my cue ball to get there, then I consider using rails as breaks, the wide part of zones, and playing the line of position as tools, as like sub tools that you can use to kind of serve that idea of how to help your cue ball hit your targets. But those are solutions to a problem, which is, I don't know if I can hit my target. If you know you can hit your target, there's no value in forcing to play the line of position. And so it basically, it works for you. You don't work for it. That's what I have to say about playing the line. Sorry.
Right. I think it's so funny because this sort of ties into mental game a little bit. It's the idea that you're sort of passively, carefully trying to attack the line of the shot, right? By trying to be smart. But if you were to just feel the shot, I know that sounds very vague, but like feel the shot, hit it more confidently. Again, for me, that means stunning more. It's crazy how much better position I get if I'm stunning more often. Not that I do it all the time, but the more that I stun the ball and hit it with optimal speed, the better my cue ball is, even though it's not the most
so here's
optimal.
One thing I like to say about this is the second best plan executed with confidence will always outperform the best plan executed tentatively. 100%. So,
yeah.
So in the end, and this goes to like when you're learning stuff, you're learning all kinds of new shots and you're learning all kinds of new ideas. And then you're trying to find a way to play with all those ideas. You know, one thing I've been doing with straight pool lately, I'll send you a video. It's not a public video, but I talk about how I play straight pool and I review myself playing some straight pool and no thunderous runs, but you know, I mean, I play okay. But what you'll find is it's not about I'm not running balls because I'm following all the rules. It's like knowing when not to follow the rules and when to just run the balls out the way they want to be run, as opposed to trying to save this key ball and make it go the way the book says. And you'd be surprised at how you've got to know the rules. And by all means, there are principles that you kind of follow, but you follow them when they serve you. You don't sabotage yourself trying to follow them when they won't serve you. And so part of it too is that's why I like to do the boot camps is, I mean, people can learn ideas and then try to, they're overusing certain ideas, like always trying to play the line or always trying to have a key ball or always trying to play a certain way. And then B, they're playing this mechanical style. It's like, it would be like taking a writing class and then somebody that came out, you could tell somebody that took a writing class recently, because then they start shoehorning in all these techniques of quality writing and it just looks forced. Whereas people that just write, they might use those techniques, but it doesn't look like somebody trying to pass an English test. So anyway, I help people learn some of these ideas, but then we don't serve them. We learn how to blend them and balance them and blend them into a good, confident, effective game, as opposed to, we're not subservient to them. Anyway, I got carried away again.
It's descriptive, not prescriptive.
There you go. Exactly.
There you go.
Cool. Okay. So zone. So I think we covered kind of what we wanted. I'm just going to look at my notes here and make sure I'm not crazy, but that's a good start. So I'm going to link his video on the flow cycle, and then I I'm good. So then there's just one. Yeah, I guess that's good. I guess I'm good on that. Are you good on that?
I think the only thing we didn't cover really in depth is like the things that you do in training that are flow based, but that's fine. Flow is really about prepping your mind to be open to flow more than it is about what exactly you're doing on the table, etc. So
Yeah, it's hunting is when you go out and you're trying to kill something today to bring home to the cave for dinner. But
right.
then farming is planting seeds so that someday
Yeah.
a crop may come in. And if you think about flow, instead of thinking about like I'm going to go out and spear, I'm going to go out and get something, I'm going to go get it. Just look at it like you're just going to plant seeds and let it develop. And that's
This is why you're such a good teacher, Demi. It's because everything is a metaphor to you, and it explains everything so much better than I can with my dumb science.
I'm just full of it, man. Anyway, it's good. No, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll take a compliment. Thank you. But yeah. Um, Very good. Well, listen, Nate, this was fun. I'm sure we're going to get questions. I'm sure we're going to get comments. So I'm sure we'll have to chat again. But
We'll do it again. Yeah.
for now, I will say thank you very much for joining. Check out his video and check out his channel. And we will thank you guys for tuning in and catch you next episode.